Okay, welcome everybody. The annual Islamophobia conference that is organized by affiliates of the Decolonial International Network is this year, because of the COVID crisis, we haven't been able to organize physical conference, but obviously webinars like this are the possibilities of now and maybe even of the future. So this conference is organized by Decolonial International Network Foundation and supported by Scotland Against Criminalization Communities, Decolonial Thought Community in Mexico, Islamic Human Rights Commission, who is so graciously to provide the whole infrastructure for this event. And today we're going to talk about Islamophobia in the context of political Islam. Because the whole discussion of political Islam is going on for decades now in the West. And we thought it was good to have the discussion both from a theoretical perspective, which is the first block, which we are going to deal with what is political Islam. And then we have a second block into looking how this discussion is waged in different countries in Europe. So my name is Sandew Hira. I'm a member of the board of the Decolonial International Network Foundation, the DIN Foundation, and we'll be presenting this together with Nargess, my dear friend from London. I'm based in The Hague.
Hi there, Sandew. Good to see you. Yes, just to introduce myself, my name is Nargess Moballeghi. I'm a journalist and documentary filmmaker, and it has been more than my pleasure to accept Sandew's invitation to host this important event today, wherever you are in the world. And it's truly an international event, Sandew. That's one of the positives of these kind of online events. We are going to be hearing from speakers across the world. I just thought at this point, I'll just give a brief rundown of what we should expect today. So for the first session, we'll be hearing from Hakima Saghayabiria, Mohammad Asi, who will be speaking on the sources of on politics and Islam from different traditions. That will be with Sandew. Followed by a discussion. And then a little later on, if you do stay with us, I will be discussing civil liberties and human rights with a focus on different European countries. So speaking on the UK, we'll have Abed Choudhury. Talking on Austria, we'll have Masoud Shajara, France, Huria Batelja, from the Netherlands, Shaher Khan, and Sweden, Amanj Aziz. And then to end our program, we'll be joined by the Professor Ramon Grossvogel, who'll be discussing with Sandew Hira, kind of bringing everything together. A reminder at this point, before I hand over to you, Sandew, that wherever you are watching in the world, on whatever platform, you can get involved with the discussion by sending your questions through as we're live, and we will certainly pick up on those questions when we get them in the discussion panels. Please do stay with us. I have been lucky enough to interview many of our speakers today, and really excited to hear from those I have not yet met before. A really important topic. And Sandew, I'll hand over to you.
Thank you, Nargess. Our first speaker is Hakima Saghayabiria from Iran. Obviously, the Iranian Revolution was a big catalyst in the whole discussion of political Islam. Hakima is an author of a book, Elite American Think Tank, Construction of Political Islam, under the grip of Orientalism and American Exceptionalism, which came out in 2019. And it's available via Amazon.com and probably other venues. So I'm delighted to talk to Hakima, which I had the pleasure of having previous discussions. And Hakima, I would like to give you the floor to share your experience of the discussion on political Islam in Iran.
Yes, thank you very much for having me in this very important event. Let me first say my greetings to all who are having us, hearing us, and sharing their thoughts in this important event. The issue of Islam and politics in Iran has been with us from the time that colonial powers have encroached Iranian politics. So it is something that has been with us for more than 100 years. Why am I making a connection between colonialism and the issue of Islam and politics? It is because it was colonialism that actually made Islamic activism more important in Iran. That Islamic scholars and Islamic activists saw how colonialism was taking over Iranian politics and Iranian resources, and basically taking over Iranian lives, how Iranians ordered their lives. So we have Muslim scholars from that time. They take the lead in the fight against colonialism and against all the wrongful what would you say? It's the wrongful politics that they had in Iran. It was at that time that the colonialist powers found Islam to be a source of fear and a source of danger to their interests, Iran and in the world. And this was not just happening in Iran; it was happening elsewhere in the world. For example, in India, in other parts of the Islamic world, you see that Muslim scholars are in the forefronts of the fight against colonialism. In India, we have that, for 100 years before the actual excuse me for the. So in India, for 100 years before we have the movement of Mahatma Gandhi, for example, Muslim scholars and Muslim activists are fighting against colonialism. So it is this kind of experience that the colonialist powers had that actually led them to try to find a way of making the connection between Islam and politics something that was unsavory among Muslim populations, and try to promote the idea of separation of Islam and politics. Let me refer to a word of Imam Khomeini in his letter to Gorbachev, guidance in understanding the situation. He talks about the idea that religion is not the opium of the masses, because he was talking to Gorbachev at a time when he was giving some certain liberties to the Muslim republics of the Soviet Union, the Soviet. So he Khomeini says that this action of yours show that you don't believe that religion is the opium of masses. So, and then he says, indeed, how can Islam be the opium of the masses, the religion that has made Iranians as firm as a mountain against superpowers? So Imam Khomeini sees Islam as a source of power for Iranians against the encroachment of superpowers into their lives. And then he continues, is the religion that seeks administration of justice in the world and man's freedom from material and spiritual shackles, the opium of masses. So he actually talks about the idea that this connection between Islam and politics is a source of power for Muslim populations. And then he says, only that religion is the opium of the masses that causes the material and spiritual resources of Islamic and non-Islamic countries to pass into the clutches of super and lesser powers, and that preaches that religion is separate separate from politics and Islam that he says the Iranians call American Islam. So because of this clash between Islamic politics and colonial encroachment into the lands of Muslims, colonial powers tried to actually promote this idea of separation of Islam and politics through two trends that we could call Islamophobia. One trend was showing a vicious face for Islam, showing that Islam was violent. Another trend was that Islam was peace and Islam had nothing to do with politics. Islam was for spirituality. So two trends were actually followed in trying to appease the Muslim populations against colonial encroachment into their lands. So here we have this long history of the clash of interests between Islam and colonial powers. After colonialism has passed, with the superpowers and with those who who actually try to have their order in the world. So I would make this try to kind of look at this issue from this angle. How was the issue of separation of Islam and politics brought into Muslim lands? And how was this issue promoted in the Muslim lands? And how did Islamic scholars try to overcome this pressure from the outside powers? I would call it a reverse racism that was promoted in Muslim imposition of the idea that Islam was the cause of your lack of freedom or lack of lack of progress. Through making this connection between Islam and the situation of the Muslim world, a kind of reverse racism was inoculated and made into the minds of the Muslim populations that you have to hate yourself in order for you to be able to progress, in order for you to be free. This kind of duality created between Islam and progress and Islam and freedom. But then it was actually the work and activism of Muslim scholars and Muslim populations, Muslim activists that worked against this idea of reverse racism, and actually overcame that reverse racism and brought to the fore the idea that Islam was the source of power. Islam was actually the source of freedom, the source. So changing the way, the outlook that Muslims had towards Islam was what the figures like Imam Khomeini did. That Islam was what gave Muslims the power and the activism that they needed in order to actually be able to confront the very encroachment of outside powers into their lives.
Okay. Right. Thank you, Hakima. Are you
yes,
finished?
Sandew.
Are you no? Okay. No. Do you want to continue? You have a few minutes.
Okay. And actually, if I go back to what Imam Khomeini had to say on this, he said that materialism cannot bring humanity out of the crisis caused by spirituality. So when Islam gave the Muslim populations this this power and impetus to actually use it to actually overcome the problems that were there for people around the world, no matter what ideology we're following. We see that he finds Islam to be the only source for the people around the world to overcome materialism, which defines the source of all the calamities that humanity is facing. So it is this power of Islam that is making it the target of all the attacks that we are seeing in the world against the very idea of Islam. That's what does Islam mean? What does a good Muslim mean? All of these are being becoming the targets of attacks from the different powers around the world, powers who have colonial backgrounds, who have colonial histories. So if I want to give, I think this would be enough for now. If I could have your thoughts.
Thank you, Hakima. We'll come back to the discussion. I think one of the interesting things which you are mentioning is which is a problem, of course, in the Western world, and that is that there is an activism inspired by Islam to fight colonialism, and that is the experience which has been there in different parts of Asia and West Asia, or particularly in Iran. So we'll come back into the discussion on the Iranian experience. I want to introduce our next speaker, Mohammad Asi, who is very well known in the Muslim world, studied in the Arab University of Beirut, and editor of Crescent Internationally, a monthly magazine associated with the Institute for Contemporary Islamic Thoughts. So I'm very happy to introduce our brother from the United States, and who will enlighten us about what the Islamic sources are saying about this kind of activism. Please go on, Mohammed.
Hello, can you hear me?
We can.
Okay. First of all, it's thank you so much for having me on. And thank you so much, you and everyone else who participated in making this effort possible today. As regards the sources, your first question is regarding the sources of this Islamic reassertion or Islamic reawakening or Islamic self-determination, to be blunt about it. The source is the Quran. There's no other source. Let me put it bluntly and frankly. If it wasn't for the Quran, Muslims would be like creatures in the wilderness, grabbing at any ideological or any philosophical straw that's out there. And then there are derivatives to the Quran. There's the statements of the established and verifiable statements of the Prophet, because there's also some statements attributed to him that don't belong to him. There's a pollution in that sphere. And then there are the struggle throughout the ages by those who stood for the central theme of the Quran, which can be capsulated in one word: social justice. Now, I need to clarify something here, because I think it's way past time. It's way overdue for us to make this clear. And that is the Quranic message is left, right, and center a message of justice. That message of justice has been sabotaged by, and this is a long and historical process, but it is there, and it behooves anyone who wants to clear the air on this subject to pay close attention and to exert utmost effort in clarifying this issue. And this issue is that the language of the Quran has been dynamited. And I mean that not in the positive sense, I mean it in the negative sense. It has been destroyed. The language has been destroyed throughout the ages. And as I said, there's many reasons for this. There's many variables that go with it. But the final result is the Quran became a book equivalent to the Judeo-biblical books of religion. And the Judeo-Christian books on religion, they have, and they also have their own history, mind you. I'm not trying to put anyone down here. But what happened, because all of the messengers from God, they had a mission, and that was to see to it that social justice becomes the way of life of all societies on all earth at all times. So something along the line happened, and that is those who have power and wealth, historically and contemporarily, they want to assassinate the word justice. They can't assassinate a concept. So the next best thing to do is get rid of or assassinate those who stand for the concept of justice. Now, justice can be defined in many ways. There's those who are on the left, the political left, who have their definitions for justice. Those who are on the political right have their definitions for justice. And everyone in between has their definition for justice. The Quran happens to be a definition for justice that comes from the creator of everyone who's on the left and everyone who's on the right and everyone who's in between. So we have an ageless definition of justice, social justice. And what's happening in our current world affairs is that there are some people who come from history of Islam who are beginning to rediscover the meanings of justice in their holy scripture. And the rediscovery of this meaning of justice, which brings with it equality, and it tears down the barriers of racism and nationalism and sectarianism for those who, because every religious group has its sectarians, and the lethal danger that today is playing out in the geography of the world, where this Islamic reawakening to the central concept of social justice is taking place. We have this particular region right now being targeted with warfare. So the mental ammunition that they had by obfuscating the social justice contents of the Quran, that mental ammunition they ran out of. So what is happening is a reinforcement of the let's say, avant-garde Muslims who right now have resuscitated the justice center, the social justice. Because sometimes there's a difference between social justice and justice. So both of these words together is what I mean. So when the mental ammunition of colonialism and imperialism, when that mental ammunition was exhausted, they turned to military ammunition now. They can't defeat ideas, so they say, well, let's begin to defeat those who are standing up for these ideas. And they found in this warfare, and I need not point, there's several areas that come to anyone who is living in the practical world today. They know the areas of the world that I am referring to. And these areas of the world are stuck in a sectarianism and counter-sectarianism, which unfortunately, I say this, has been a detriment to the potential, because people in this world, look, you know, the world was living in the past century, was living on the hope that socialism will solve its chronic problems. Socialism played out in the 20th century in its different, shapes and its different programs and its different countries. It played out, but it did not deliver. Capitalism was doomed before that. And so the world is at a crossroads. Where do you go from here? Globalism comes along and just exacerbates the whole problem, the whole sets of problems that have unsettled worldwide societies. And the only glimmer of hope, and there are two segments of the world that are very aware of this. The two segments that are keen on either reinstating Islam or on killing Islam off. And those are the frontline Muslims, and on one side, and on the other side, there is this teaming up of Zionism and imperialism, working through its proxies to try to defeat this Islamic move for self-determination. That's all it is, self-determination. So I don't know if I'm maybe covering some of the territory that is intended in your program or not, but I'd like to emphasize that the reinstatement of Islam is an open invitation to all the peoples of the world, not to be confused with the religiosity of Islam, which has been hijacked throughout the centuries by forces by structural forces that have wealth and power at their disposal to shrink Islam into a religion as is defined and understood by them, and then subject everyone else to their mindset. And this is one of the obstacles in trying to have the Muslims outgrow this mental cage and present Islam not in the first place as a set of rituals, but in the first place as a pursuit for justice. This is the task that right now we are witnessing playing itself out in the different theaters of propagandistic warfare, psychological warfare, all the way up to the hot and cold military wars that we see unfolding in front of us. So the source, to go back to your original question, the source is the Quran. And from there on, you can look at the other sources throughout history that survived, because there were establishments, dynasties, kingdoms, monarchies, power structures in these 14 centuries, not to speak about the centuries before these 14 centuries, because we're speaking about a divine message to all of humanity that has at its core one objective, and that is social justice. The prophets Abraham and Moses and Jesus and all of the rest, these were prophets sent to anchor a concept of justice and social justice in their particular societies and beyond their particular societies. This is the trust that the Muslims carry in our time, in our age. Muslims, if they understand themselves correctly, by redefining themselves as they are doing, this redefinition of the Islamic self is costing Muslims very dearly. There are millions of Muslims in the world, along with them the oppressed segments of the world, both of them not having the efficient bridges and the efficient communication going on among them, precisely because there are these power structures in the world that want to see it that Muslims cannot communicate their message of social justice to the rest of the world that is thirsty for this message of social justice. So the source, to put it easily, is the Quran and the Islamic literature that survived these centuries, Islamic literature, Islamic scholars, Islamic activists, Islamic heroes in wars against aggression and against injustice. Some of them have their legacy in the form of books or booklets or whatever. And in the contemporary time, we also have these types of individuals. Mention was made in the previous speaker of the late Imam al-Khomeini, may Allah rest his soul in eternal peace, and others. Mutahhari in the case of Iran, you have Mutahhari, you have Shari'ati, and you have others. Unfortunately, and I have to say this, we don't have in the contemporary setup. Iran has a lot of issues to deal with, and may Allah help them deal with all of these issues, along with the rest of us who find ourselves in the same boat, in the same direction. But one of the observations of Islamic Iran currently is its lack of the towering figures that came along at the launching of that tremendous and successful human effort that culminated in the Islamic Revolution and the Islamic Republic, which withstood these past 40 plus years of combined forces in the world. The same forces I was referring to, the historical forces, came back with a vengeance in the teaming up of Zionism and imperialism and the proxyisms that they have throughout the Muslim East, throughout that general area. You can just look at a map. Look at the military bases that are surrounding the Islamic Republic, and look at also the warfare that is going on in regions in close proximity to the Islamic Republic. All of this shows you, and it should show anyone with a thinking mind, that there is hope for humanity. there is a possibility, a probability for social justice to become a fact of life, no longer some theories in some academic books researched by some degree-seeking scholars or students. No, this can become a fact of life. But we have to begin to see this picture with clarity. We can't be foggy, and we can't be befuddled about what's going on. And we can't also, and for those who are tuned in with an Islamic commitment or background or degree of involvement, we cannot fall in sectarianism. Cannot be solved by sectarianism. This is the last card that they are playing against us. And because we are vulnerable to it on both sides, there's two sides to this issue. Because we are vulnerable to it, some of us are playing to the tune of the Zionists and imperialists. I hope with that I have said enough, and it looks like I may have taken a minute or two over time, but thank you so much for the opportunity to express myself. And if you have any questions, please ask.
I have a few questions to you and Hakime. Maybe you can bring Hakime also in. What you're saying is that the sources, the core of how to interpret the sources of what Muslims should do is not the ritualistic interpretation, that it's about rituals and which separates you from politics. Basically, in the West, it led to the separation in Christianity of church and politics. You argue that the issue of social justice.
I can't hear anything.
Let's see. Hakima, can you hear me? Because I see that
the voice is not coming. There's a lot of static, and I can't hear any voice.
Sorry.
Yes,
I don't know if
yes,
you
I
can
can.
hear me.
Yeah, you can hear me. And Mohammed, can you hear me now? Hello, can you hear me now, Mohammed? Let's see if the technique can help us solve this problem of sound.
Now I can hear you.
All right. Okay. Good. So let me put this question.
I have your voice.
The question of social justice in the 20th century, 21st century now, has to deal with a lot of problems which, when Islam arose, were not there, but are articulated by many people in social movements. Feminism, LGBT, all issues where around the world is entering the era of social justice. Now, what I would like to ask you is, how do you deal from the sources with these problems which were maybe then not articulated, but are seen in social movements as part of the social justice problem? And for Hakima, how did Iran deal with these issues? So maybe we could start with Mohammed.
Well, human nature is human nature. Whatever problems existed in the past exist today and will exist in the future. The only difference is they take on a different configuration or a different coloration. But the problems in essence are the same. When we're talking about social justice, we talk about a very good example of this is racism. Racism existed centuries and millennia ago. The problem exists today, and if we continue to stumble around, it will continue into the future, centuries, potentially millennia into the future. So the problems, when we're talking about social justice, we're talking about human beings. And when we talk about the offshoots of social justice, equality, freedoms, the freedoms that we have by virtue of our creators dignifying us at birth, all of these exist. It's not like, today you have an issue pertaining to dislocation of wealth. That's an issue. You have I don't know, a few 40 individuals in the world having 80% of the wealth of the world or something like that. That's a big problem. It existed then. Today's secular programs, educational programs, they don't want us to see the continuum of history into our present. They want us to think that, oh, a long time ago, these were primitive societies and they had no semblance of the type of problems that we have today. Wrong. All of these secular, and just like the media is a instrument of the powers that be, educational systems are instruments of the power that be. And so this is what we are dealing with. When we speak about justice, we are speaking about, or social justice, we are speaking about overcoming these chronic, historical, lingering problems. We can do that. You can do it. If you're a non-Muslim, if unfortunate, I've been dealing with this issue for the past 20 years. I've been trying to rehabilitate and re-energize the meanings of this Quran. The original meanings are in the Arabic language, obviously, but those meanings can be lifted from the Arabic language to other languages, not with this high dose of religiosity and ritualistic performances that has been the case. And this is exactly what these people who have the power and wealth want us to do. They want us to be high on rituals and zilch on social justice.
So I'm curious how this experience was discussed in Iran, Hakim. Can you enlighten us about how in Iran this discussion about social justice activism with the modern social movements, themes that the modern social movements bring on? Feminism, LGBT, whatever. Ecology, globalization.
I think we could, of course. I think we could make this. Actually, maybe we could have a context before we discuss that, and that is we have levels of justice and we have levels of injustice that we have to take into consideration. And in the politics of Islamic revolution, all these levels of justice and injustice have been taken into consideration. Levels of justice towards yourself, justice towards others, your fellow human beings around you, and then justice in your relationship with Allah. Levels of injustice, the same goes with that. Just injustice towards yourself, injustice towards others, and injustice in the sense of what your relationship is with your creator. We see that if we want to have a discussion about what ails humanity right now, it is the ailment is that there is injustice at two levels. One is at the level of aggression and oppression on the political field and in the social field, and then there is oppression on the field of your spirituality and the way you look at humanity, you look at human beings, the lack of spirituality that you see in the world. So in Islam, in Iran, actually, in Imam Khomeini, Rizwanullah alayhi, peace be upon him, the way he looked at the promotion of justice in the Islamic revolution, it was that first you have to build justice within you. You have to look at how you could build justice inside you. You had to build your humanity first, and then you have to move in a struggle against those who are oppressing people around you and people in the world. So we have the idea of jihad in two senses. One is jihad against or struggle against those who are oppressing humanity and oppressing and promoting injustice in the world, encroaching your rights, encroaching your even undermining your humanity, questioning your very humanity. And that is what is happening with racism and with all those what you see in the deficit of social justice around the world, the oppression that is happening. So you have to pursue justice on the different fronts that are there, on the different levels that are there. First, you have to pursue justice inside you, with building yourself, with building your spirituality, with building your relationship with your Lord, with building an identity that is, that actually takes you out of the world of the low desires. And after you have achieved that, then you can go and pursue justice in the world outside of yourself, and then you can actually confront oppressors and pursue the struggle in the the struggle for justice in the political field and in the social field. So I think this is the levels of justice that we have to pay attention to. That is important.
Okay, thank you very much, and thank you both for your contribution in this block. We are moving to the second block, where we are going to look at how in Europe and the different countries, this problem of political Islam, activism, fighting for social justice, and the backlash it has in terms of how the government and the dominant society reacts to it. So again, thank you both for your contributions, and I would like to ask Nargess to take over for the second block.
Thank you very much, Sandew. Really interesting conversation there. And thanks, of course, to Mohammad Asi and Hakima Biria, who are joining us from the United States and Iran, ironically. Yes, as Sandew said, block 2 of this Islamophobia conference is going to be on civil liberties and human rights within the context of Muslims in Europe, political Islam, and some of the topics that we've been discussing. If you are just joining us, let me remind you, you're tuned in live to the Islamophobia Conference 2020. We will be hearing from speakers across Europe in this block. We are joined by Abed Choudhury, Masoud Shajara, Huria Batelja, Sheher Khan, and Amanj Aziz. I'd like to welcome all of our speakers, and a reminder that you can pose your questions to any of our speakers in this block, and we will get to your questions in the live Q&A. We've already had some questions coming in, but please do continue to send them. We will be going to the UK first. And just a reminder before we start to all our speakers, we are quite tight for schedule and a lot of speakers in this block. So please do keep your comments to 10 minutes. From the UK, first and foremost, we are joined by Abed Choudhury, who is a researcher at the Islamic Human Rights Commission, and is going to be focusing on the United Kingdom and what is happening there in terms of Islamophobia, civil liberties and human rights. Abed, thank you for joining us. Good to see you. I haven't seen you for a long time. Over to you. So I just think you're muted. If that's something you can address on your end, please do. If not, maybe the technician can.
Unmuted. Thank you so much for having me. Sorry about that. Okay, so the brief we were given was to obviously talk about activism and how it impacts on Muslims. Now, last year and the year before, the Islamophobia conferences sort of focused in on this area. So last year's conference was about shrinking civil society spaces, sort of how civil society organizations are being attacked and silenced. And the year before that, we discussed Zionism and pro-Israel activism and how that related to the fueling of Islamophobia here in the UK and across Europe, in fact. The issues discussed at those conferences have remained very much alive throughout 2020 and have in fact gained increased urgency for Muslims in the UK. The IHRA continues to be pushed by Zionist activities and pro-Israel advocates, and we saw the UK government, the Education Secretary, call on universities to adopt it. This definition, I won't go into the definition and sort of what it involves, but the definition, along with the examples of anti-Semitism it provides, will definitely impact on all pro-Palestinian activists, irrespective of race, faith, religion, whatever it is, their background. But it has a particular negative impact for Muslim activists, both in the way it is utilized against them and the fact that large numbers of Muslims do in fact support the Palestinian cause, so they will be disproportionately affected and targeted. And so with this sort of increased and aggressive use of the IHRA definition to attack those who criticize Israel, we're going to see professionals and students being targeted for their activism and the things they see. And so they're going to get maligned and criticized in the public sphere. We've already seen this with a number of cases that IHRC has worked with. So if this definition is allowed to gain further momentum, many Muslims will either end up self-censoring, so what they will and won't say about Israel is going to get very sort of limited, or they're just going to completely disengage with politics when it comes to the Middle East conflict, in order to avoid sort of being targeted by their employers or by their universities. One or both of those outcomes will be a major victory for pro-Israel advocates, because it basically means a constituency of critics have just basically silenced themselves and disengaged with the process. So this, throughout 2020 and even before that, it has remained an issue and is becoming more and more of an issue purely because the government is sort of putting greater weight on the definition itself. I think an interesting point to note is that the IHRA definition will create a hierarchy of victimhood. One group is given greater protection by the use of this definition over and above all other sort of minorities. This lopsided situation in the long term will undermine the definition itself. You can't justify special privileges and protections for one group while denying it to others. The definition itself will ultimately lose legitimacy amongst anti-racist activists and the public more generally. And instead of creating solidarity among targeted groups, we'll end up creating divisions. And we already see this with the number of groups coming out in opposition to the definition. The definition itself sort of shows an issue that it shows that when it comes to free speech, some groups have greater rights to others. Now, this is something that Muslims have known for a long time. For example, insulting Islam is within free speech here in Europe. But Muslims protesting that Islam politically and peacefully is presented as anti-free speech rather than an exercise of their own political rights. So, rights are enjoyed in a very sort of lopsided way. This unequal distribution of rights impacts many minority communities and involves, a whole gamut of fundamental rights, from free speech to the right to life. So, for example, we know that a disproportionate number of young black men die in custody in the UK and across Europe. And I think it is important that we highlight these disparities in how political and civil rights are enjoyed and protected. But it's not enough that we just highlight them. Many people across Britain and across Europe even, they know the inequalities that exist in the system when it comes to how fundamental rights are enjoyed. What we need to do is actually seek change. Saying things are unfair is not enough. We must demand positive change. And so one of the arguments to be used in arguing this to the majority communities is that allowing inequalities to impact minorities specifically, so laws targeting minorities, because it doesn't affect them, the majority community, might work for them in the short term because it's not impacting them. But in the long term, it will impact them. any discriminatory law or policy may initially start off targeting a minority community, but once it's law, it can be rolled out to target everyone. So, for example, here in the UK, we had the prevent policy, and right from its inception, it was discussed purely within the context of Muslims and getting Muslims to integrate better into society. And every single step that the law was widened and made more and more draconian, the discussion was all in the media and amongst the political circles was always within the context of Muslims and Islamism. And yet we now see that prevent is being used against, for example, climate change activists. So now what we have a situation where a policy that was ostensibly started with targeting Muslims has been widened to target white middle class Britain, who did not ever think that prevent would ever impact on them. The prevent policy, it was always something for the minorities, in particular Muslims. So the point that we need to emphasize in trying to get change and in trying to get sort of equal access to these rights and these civil liberties is to emphasize that the laws and policies being used to attack civil liberties of minorities, of silencing them, of curtailing their rights, can and has and will be widened to impact more and more groups that the government wishes to target. And the best way to stop for the other groups themselves, majority groups included, from becoming targets of these draconian laws, is to basically stop these laws and policies being enacted in the first place. One of the things I just want to quickly sort of move on to in terms of activists, one of the things that here in the UK we're doing at the moment is the issue of the definition of Islamophobia. So Muslims have been discussing the issue of the what does Islamophobia actually mean here in the UK since 30, 40 years ago. Certainly since IHRC has been around, this discussion has been there. The initial discussions were, does Islamophobia even exist? Is it a thing? And later it sort of moves on to, what do we mean by it? Today, what we're seeing, especially this year, what we've seen is, discussions around, what is Islamophobia? Is it religious discrimination? Is it racialization? Is it racism? And so this debate's been taking place at the moment. Now, ordinary Muslims who face anti-Muslim discrimination, they don't need a definition. If they've been discriminated because of their religion at work, on the streets, they know what it is. They don't necessarily need a definition. But a definition is a tool that we use structurally for the system itself. And so it's a useful tool. But yet we're arguing about this as to whether it's religious discrimination or racism. Now, racism looked at from a wider sociological lens is about racialization. There is no such thing as a race. We just have the human race. But racialization is the process whereby you essentialize certain qualities into a group. Racism, and Professor Ramon, who'll come later, he's discussed this in the past, and he can do it much better than me. But racism comes from the fact that over the last 500 years, we've seen the development of race sciences, and initially it starts off by targeting sort of people of different religions. So Muslims and Jews were targeted in Spain, and it sort of develops over time into targeting people of different colors and discrimination based on biological reasons. And it's about otherizing and dehumanizing people. And today what we've seen is a resurgence of racism based on religion and culture mixed in with the old biological racism. So racialization is about otherization, dehumanization of an outgroup, and then disempowering them structurally. That is what Islamophobia as racism is. And that's why we need racism, definitions of Islamophobia to target this form of racism. Because if you're dealing with something at a structural level, you need a definition that the structure can understand and utilize. Now, I raise this point as Muslims need to understand this point about racism or Islamophobia being a form of racism, and it's not just about religious discrimination, and understanding that this debate and argument that we're having, it's a red herring. It divides us and it frustrates our purpose by forcing basically to turn our energies against one another rather than against the state and the structure. If we want to build a strong social movement, a strong movement for social justice and equality, our focus needs to turn to the structure that creates and allows Islamophobia to exist. and hold it to account, not sort of turn all our energies splitting hairs about, is it racial discrimination? Is it racial discrimination or religious discrimination? Are we talking about definitions based on religion and so on? So we really, really do need to start turning our energies as activists towards the state and holding it to account. Thank you.
Thank you very much there, Abed Choudhury, researcher at the IHRC, which is the Islamic Human Rights Commission. And of course, the IHRC is host of this event alongside the DIN, the Decolonial Thought Community, which is based in Mexico, and in Scotland, the Scottish Association Against Criminalising Communities. Thank you very much. Islamic Human Rights Commission Chair Masood Shajara joins us now, who will be giving our next speech, focusing on Austria. Is that right, Masood? Good to see you.
Yes, that's right.
10 minutes over to you.
Right, thank you. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. I'm trying to sort of address what is happening in Australia and indeed how that fits in to the discussion that we are having today. Just to look at the historical sort of involvement of Muslims. Muslims reach Austria in 1529, when the sort of the Turks came almost to the walls of the capital, Vienna and the Europe has actually always caused that moment that almost the Muslims took over the whole Europe and a big chunk of it. But in reality, the Muslim involvement in Austria could be sort of highlighted in 1908, when the empire actually took over Bosnia-Herzegovina, which was predominantly Muslim, and therefore needs to address its involvement with its Muslim population, which by that definition became a realistic number. And 4 years after that, in 1912, they passed that famous legislation, which is accommodating Muslim, recognizing Muslims, and as citizens and as a group of people with the different needs and aspiration, and those needs and aspiration was addressed. So the Muslim community of the empire, i.e. majority of Bosnia-Herzegovina, will feel that their needs, their aspiration, their equal citizenship is being addressed. And this is very important because, to my knowledge, that's the only place in Europe that actually accommodated the Muslim and Islam and its citizens in that way. The other issue which we need to know is that, in 1971, there was 700,000 Muslims, according to the census in Austria. And currently, the estimate is that something in the region of 7 million Muslim living there, which come from different backgrounds, and a very large number of them are from Turkey. And indeed, the next largest group are from former Yugoslavia and Bosnia-Herzegovina. And then there are people from all different backgrounds, and indeed, very thriving numbers of reverts or converts who have become Muslims, and they are quite sizable and very vocal. Now, when we look at the situation of Islamophobia, I think we need to sort of look at first in 1999, we had sort of a campaign which with the slogans that Stop Foreign Interference, which was predominantly targeted against Muslims and their numbers and their sort of influence in Austria. And then sort of that campaign by extreme right was growing and taking getting a life of its own. And the personality which was really involved in forefront of these sort of addressing these campaigns and these concern of extreme right was current Chancellor Kurz, Sebastian Kurz. He has been one of those prominent members who have been involved in promoting this level of Islamophobia and addressing the sort of the concern of extreme right vis-a-vis Muslims, and this other organization, creating organization with Muslims. And I think what is really important to recognize that the first thing we saw that legislation which was brought in was in 2015, which turned that 1912 sort of legislation, which was accommodating the needs and aspirations and the recognition of Muslims as citizens of the empire, that was sort of repealed, and it was the clock was turned back, and Muslims, that no longer that protection, that belonging, that recognition of their needs, their aspiration to be addressed in that way. And that led that in 2017, we saw the another legislation regarding anti-facial thing for the niqab. And then in 2018, the headscarf ban, which was only last week the highest court in Austria actually sort of decided that this is unacceptable, and actually give verdict against it. But the direction has been sort of going in that way of creating and promoting that Muslims are no longer part and parcel of Austria. And they are others, they are people who actually should be tolerated. And, what I normally say is that, turning the clock towards the view that Muslims are not citizens, Muslims are sort of colonial subject, and they need to be dealt with as such. And the funny side of this is that even at the colonial subject, when the empire took over Bosnia and Herzegovina, they were given more recognition as citizens than they are being given right now. And so, unlike sort of places like France and Britain and other colonial power, which when they went to India and everywhere else, they actually sort of undermined them and, very clearly had the sort of colonial intent but Austria did actually address that needs and aspiration and a special concern of having citizens which are Muslim. And now that has been reversed and turned around. Now, the point that is happening now, and I want to quickly reach this point, is that now the Chancellor Kurz is arguing that we want to go against and make unlawful, pass legislation to make political Islam unlawful. Now, first of all, how do you make political Islam unlawful? How do you define politics and Islam when politics and Islam has been interacted, being part of each other from the beginning of Islam, when the Prophet ﷺ was not just a spiritual leader, but the leader, political leader. How could you do that, first of all? And second of all, how you define political Islam? And one thing that he has said is that we are not going just against those who are terrorists, but we go against those who are not terrorists, but they are sort of providing support and encouragement for people to become terrorists, i.e., we are going to be policing the thoughts of people. And that's very dangerous. And we need to stand up and we need to be accounted against this way, which is also being introduced in France and in Britain. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Masood Shajara, there. Speaking on the situation in Austria, mentioning France there just at the end of his comments, which aptly brings us on to Hira Batalja, who's joining us from France. Hira is a writer and activist. Good to see you, Hira. I will hand over quickly to you, Waika Salam, for your 10 minutes.
Assalamu alaikum, everybody, brothers and sisters. Do you hear me?
Yes, we do.
Yes. Thank you so much for this invitation. Thank you, Dean, for this very important conference. And it's much more important that, as you know, in France, the situation is very worrisome towards towards the condition of the Muslims in France. This is the reason of my talk. This is the subject of my talk, what is happening in France. So let's begin. The situation in France is quite, as I said, worrisome since the decapitation of Samuel Paty by a Muslim terrorist in October. And the government took this opportunity, because it was an opportunity for the government to repress even more the Muslim community. As you know, the government decided to dissolve the CCIF, which is the main important anti-racist and Muslim organization, and which is the most important organization regarding the number of members in France. It means that in France, CCIF is the most important anti-racist organization, much more than the white anti-racist organization. Maybe you know la LDH, which is one of the most of the oldest one. It is very respectable in France, but it's much less important regarding the members than the CCIF. So the CCIF was dissolved by the government, and the government dissolved also Baraka City, which is a charitable organization. The government decided also to close a certain number of mosques, and other ones are threatened to be closed. There is no link between these mosques and these organizations. There is no link between this organization and terrorism. There is but the aim of the government is to charge Muslims to make them support the responsibility of its own responsibility in the phenomenon of jihadism. I don't need to say here that France is involved in the war in Iraq, in Syria, in Yemen, or in Libya. Charging Muslims means disculping France. Charging Muslims means making France innocent. The phenomenon of terrorism is only, in the end, in the responsibility of the Muslims. The rage against Muslims is also due to our political progress. Actually, there is a pessimist way of analyzing the development of Islamophobia in France, but there is also an optimist way of analyzing this the rage against Muslims. The pessimist one is to say that Muslims do not have any power in France, so they can't protect themselves, which is true. But the optimist way is to say that our struggle is progressing. CCF, as I said, was a quite powerful organization, and powerful and autonomous. It means that CCF does not depend on the state. It is completely autonomous. So this is something very interesting to stress. Decolonial thought. So I said that there is a way, an optimist way to say that our struggle is progressing. CCF was a quite powerful organization, and also decolonial thought is now penetrating the university and the political parties. So we can analyze the panic of the government also as a reaction against our capacity of resisting. Nevertheless, the Muslim condition in France is one of the worst in Europe. Last month, 3 Turkish children were arrested 2 days. I'm talking about children about 10 years. The reactions of the white left was very weak. The main anti-racist association didn't say anything. There were only few voices who protested. For example, a Jewish anti-racist and decolonial organization, which is a close organization which is close to us. Moreover, 400 children has been singled out because they refused to observe the minute of silence for the assassinated professor. And 150 complaints have been filed against children, accusing them of justifying terrorism. So as you can see, the situation is very, very bad. And it's very terrible. When we add to all this that the repression of Muslims is made on the idea that freedom of speech is threatened by Muslims, you have a quite good idea of the way everything is reversed. The victims become the torturers. The dominated become the dominants. Islamophobia is negated, whereas anti-white racism is promoted. Actually, the debate in France about the freedom of speech that is threatened by Muslims is only a hypocrite offensive for the leading classes to defend and to protect their own right of being racist and Islamophobic. Today, the Muslim community cannot escape the fact that they are really treated like the indigenous during the colonial past. I think that what is interesting today is that Muslims are condemned to be lucid, aware of what they are really in Europe. It means that now the representatives of the Muslims have to get rid of the dreams of becoming citizens inside the French nation state. They have to put the nation state into question. In one word, and I'm going to conclude, they have to get rid of what we call the integrationism. They have to liberate themselves from integrationism, and they have to become really decolonial. This is a part of our job to develop this conscience in France and generally in Europe. And thank you very much. I can't hear you, Nargess. Okay.
Thank you for letting me know, because I had forgotten to unmute myself. I do apologize. I was just thanking you, Huria, for a sobering account of what is happening in France. Let's move on now for more reflections on Europe, this time from the Netherlands. We're joined by Sheher Khan, who's a council member of the municipality of Amsterdam for the political party Denk. Thank you very much for joining us. We've heard from perspectives from the UK, Austria and France. 10 minutes to you now to talk about the situation for Muslims in the Netherlands. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you also. So I was asked to give our vision from my party Denk on how we dealt with the situation. Let me start off with a little introduction about my party. My party is the first party founded by people of color that won seats in the previous national elections. After that, we won seats in 30 municipalities all through the Netherlands, and also in 3 provinces. We could see, like, this case, like the effects of the horrendous killing of Samuel Paty. We could really see that there's a huge difference between how we pick up these problems and the rest of Holland. I will come to that. If you ask me, there are 2 discussions or 2 sides, 2 stories going on, if I could put it that way. We got the killing of Samuel Paty. The debate in Holland focused primarily about combating extremism, which is of course good. We also back that, but we also saw the backlash against the human rights of Muslims in France, and the previous speaker just explained that very well. And we noticed that second part didn't get picked on by any other party in the Netherlands. I will give 2 examples of that. In the national parliament, my party leader mentioned the fact that there was a petition started and signed by over 120,000 Muslims in reaction to the killing of Samuel Paty, in which they said, first, we condemn all of this violence, and the second part was we want to create a society where people have more respect for each other, and the third part was we condemn all insulting of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So my party leader, Farid Azarkan, he mentioned the fact that 120,000 people signed this petition. And in Holland, if you sign 40,000 autographs, the national parliament is obliged to talk about it. But what happened, none of the, I think, 11 or 12 other parties in the national election picked this on. So this was, first of all, very interesting. They only focus on the first part, which I mentioned, like combating the extremism. And when my party leader, he mentioned the fact that, there are 120,000 Dutch citizens, mostly Muslims, who say, please have respect for my religion. We condemn all violence, but let's talk in a fashionable and a good way with each other. He endured a lot of violence, I could say. And the violence didn't come from the far right. We have 2 far right parties in the Netherlands. We got Geert Wilders and from the alt-right Thierry Baudet. The violence, the verbal violence didn't came from the far right, but it came from the so-called the reasonable center parties, the Christian Union and the Christian Democrats. And it was, you should really watch that debate, because then you can really see the way in which these 2 parties responded to Denk, and really contrast that when far-right leaders such as Geert Wilders, when they propose a ban on the headscarf, or when they try to propose a ban on the Quran, they have no opinion about that. Then they stay seated on their seats. But when a party like Denk mentions the fact that 120,000 Dutch citizens signed this petition, then they stood up and really got furious about the fact that Denk had the guts, if I get the right word, the guts to mention the fact that this petition was signed. They didn't actually want to talk about this petition at all. So you see, when Muslims try to address on a peaceful, democratic manner about what is also going on in the society, which a lot of parties are not recognizing, the response from the vast majority of other parties is to ignore that and to respond actually with verbal violence. And we also saw the same thing in Amsterdam, where I am a representative of. We saw that in Rotterdam, the Islamic Party there, they mentioned the fact that there's a program called Shelter City, and we looked up. We also have a Shelter City program in Amsterdam, which gave us an opening to talk about the situation in France, because we mentioned the fact that we have this Shelter City program, which is meant for activists that are under threat in the countries they live. So you got LGBTI activists from Jamaica, Indonesia, and so on and so on. They get a few months to come to Amsterdam and to have a quiet moment and really think things over and be in a safe environment. And we saw that, as the previous speaker mentioned, that the peaceful organizations such as CCIF is being closed down. I read a report that the leader of the Baraka City organization asked political asylum in Turkey, and we said, look, we cannot accept this. We need to propose to these organizations, to CCIF, that if you don't feel safe in your own country, we have this Shelter City program in Amsterdam, and you could come here over a few months and have time to just to be safe and think things over. And you should know the city of Amsterdam is seen nationwide as the most left municipality in the whole of Netherlands. Our mayor, Femke Halsema, is also from the Greens. So Amsterdam has a really progressive image. So when we proposed this proposal to the mayor of Amsterdam, we were also met with, she didn't actually want to respond to this. And the second time when we repeated the question, look, we understand there's a lot of, the extremism going on, and we should focus on that, but we should also focus on these peaceful Islamic organizations that are being met with state violence. And the response from the mayor was like, we're not going to do that. France is not a totalitarian regime. And so she made up this criterion to pose it as an excuse not to talk about the subject anymore, because there is no such criterion. We looked it up. There's no such criterion as there needs to be a totalitarian regime to in order to give a shelter to an activist that is being prosecuted or under threat by the state. But she made this reason up just to close down the discussion. And for me, what I see in that is the same thing which I started this when I started talking, that on the one hand, all the parties, they can see that there is extremism and we need to combat that, but they don't see the backlash from, in this case, France, the state of France, the backlash against Muslims. They don't see that. They don't see that the French state is clamping down on the human rights of Muslims. This is invisible to them. So this, if there's any more questions, I would like to, more than happy to answer them.
Thank you very much, Manj Aziz. We will be having a group discussion shortly, so there's much there to discuss about your experiences there in Amsterdam. Unfortunately, our next speaker, Manj Aziz, sorry, I think I got that wrong, Sheher Khan in the Netherlands, thank you. And from Sweden, we were supposed to be joined by Manj Aziz, who has unfortunately decided to leave us. I think at this point, I might just bring in Sandew, if I can.
Yes.
To
Thank
just
you.
fill us in on that. Yes, Sandew.
Yes, Aman sent a message in the private chat, which I want to read. We said, Assalamu alaikum. When I was invited to this panel and I saw the program, I really thought that we were focusing on Islamophobia and the escalation in Europe. I didn't, however, sign up for praising different leaders and give simplistic images of an oppressive state, which is Iran. As some from Kurdistan, of course, I have other experiences that cannot legitimize what has been said. I therefore want to excuse myself from the meeting, and I'm especially sorry to Sandew and to Masood Amanj. So everybody has right to his opinion, of course, but let me put out the principles we have in the decolonial international network on how we move forward when we have differences of opinions of each other. When we have an item like this, political Islam, it is imperative that we invite people from Iran, because Iran was the country where the whole discussion on political Islam was put on the international agenda. So it's logical to have that. But not only from a perspective of inviting people because they have a contribution to be made, but also because we have the opinion and that activists which are from different traditions can have disagreement, fundamental disagreement. We work with secular people, we work with religious people from different faiths. So we can't exclude people from a discussion because we don't agree with them. And we have this experience on a broad range. We take up in the West all the sensitive anti-imperialist countries, which is Cuba, which is Venezuela, which is Bolivia, which is Iran, which is China. So we bring in the people who the imperialists don't want to listen to, but they have their own opinion and we don't have to agree with them. But the thing in the anti-imperialist and decolonial struggle is that we only can move forward if we are willing to listen to each other, bring forward our positions, and have people have the say, and everybody will make up their mind. So I'm very sorry that Amanj took another position on that, but that's okay. We said beforehand, we sent him the program. He knew who were the people on the program, the names were there, but he didn't agree with the opinion. That is his right. But of course, we think that they have the right to venture their opinion as well. So I would turn over to you, Nargess, to have the discussion on the experience in Europe.
Yes, thank you. And of course, Amanj was invited to speak in this second panel, which has a focus on Europe, as all of our speakers have been discussing different issues surrounding Islamophobia, legislation, civil liberties, and human rights in Europe. I'd like to, if we can, get all our panelists back together. We've had a few questions online. Some are related directly to some of the speeches, some have other points to make. The first question coming in on Facebook from Abu Alamgir: what to any of the panelists, but maybe Sister Hira is best positioned to answer, what do you think of feminism in the Muslim social justice circles and some prominent Muslim personalities' objection to it? So maybe I will hand that question over to you, Hira.
I wrote a lot on this issue, the issue of feminism, and I tried during several years to analyze the role of feminism in our communities. And what I'm thinking is that that it can be a tool against our own emancipation, and it was used in the colonial past against anti-colonialism. It was used against the fight against colonialism, the topic of liberating women, etc., etc. And today it is also used against our communities because patriarchy, our patriarchy, Muslim patriarchy, the patriarchy of blacks and Muslims, is seen as more dangerous, as more sexist than the modern patriarchy of the whites. So this is a racist way of seeing our patriarchy, and what I try to develop in what I wrote is that men in our communities inside the nations, the white nation states, are also victims of white patriarchy. Women of color are not the only victims of patriarchy. White women are victims of patriarchy, women of color are victims of patriarchy, and men, non-white men are victims of white patriarchy. So this is a subject that is very complex, and we have to be aware of this complexity to be a critic about feminism. It doesn't mean that we don't have to fight patriarchy. It means that we have to be sure about who is our target. Our target, when we are decolonial, is to fight the system, is to fight coloniality, is not to make the war against men of our communities. This is my opinion.
Thank you very much there, Huria. There's a question that came through during the first block, but I've only seen it now. So I don't know if we can maybe get Imam Asi back in. It's a question that says, what is the opinion of the speakers on how to practically reintroduce a metaphysical framework for justice amongst Muslim anti-Islamophobia and anti-racism activists, in which much of the Muslims who fight against these are rooted in the language and organizing strategies based in leftist and postmodernist constructs. I don't know if Mohammad Asi, you might have something to put in there, or some of the other speakers.
I don't know if you can hear me well. I was listening to you pose the question, and there was a lot of static. I heard the word metaphysical. I heard a few other words. I don't know if I got the question correct, but I can try to respond to the type of question that I think I heard because of the cutoff of your voice. Would you like me to proceed, or you'd like to try to?
Yes, so I don't know if you can hear me now, but I think to rephrase it, to just rephrase the question, and I hope I'm rephrasing it correctly, but it's just asking practical ways to look at social justice issues that you were talking about for a metaphysical framework, when so much of activism in Europe and North America is rooted in kind of leftist and postmodernism language and constructs. And I can hear some crackling as well, so I hope you heard me better, and if you didn't, give me your best shot at an answer, and then I'll maybe pass it on.
No, I heard you better this time. I think I have the gist of the question now. Yes, there's quite a bit of mental pollution concerning the issue of social justice, which I think is an objective of the left and socialists and some others scattered all around the political terrain. How can that be practical? I was listening to one comment that was made about maybe spirituality and justice in the realm of the individual and things like that. Let me say this, and this has not really, even though the Islamic Revolution in Iran for a good many years tried to do this. Unfortunately, one of the failures, I regret to use that word, but truth is truth. One of the failures that one of the failures of the Islamic Revolution in Iran is it could not communicate the the practical meanings of justice to the rest of the oppressed peoples in the world, the mustad'afin or mustad'afan in Farsi, simply because, and you know, people in Iran are human beings just like people anywhere else. They're not angels. They are not an exception to the rule, anything like that. They just happen to be a few steps ahead of the rest of us, whether we are oppressed or whether we are Muslims, third world people, etc. And the failure is in, listen to this carefully because some people may misunderstand what I'm going to say. The failure, and it could be a failure of others, is just Iran is right there at the front line and others are behind it and others are going to proceed to that front line. We are not creatures of our moment. This is an ongoing process. The failure is that there is more spirituality in the poor, oppressed, downtrodden, underclass, excluded individual anywhere in this planet. There's more spirituality in him or her than there is spirituality in some scholars and some bigwigs who have an Islamic or a religious title to them, even though they may be going technically very accurately by the book. But in terms of addressing, quote unquote, the issue of spirituality itself, that reservoir of spirituality in the oppressed peoples of the world, regardless of their religion, regardless of their background, regardless of anything, if they are oppressed, if they are poor, living from day to day, if they are struggling to make ends meet, if they see tears on the eyes of their babies, if they see their own babies expiring in front of them because of famine, because of dislocation, because of harsh weather, whatever the case is, there is more spirituality there than any type of artificial working up an individualistic spirituality in a seminary or in a university. This is where, quote unquote, the practical gain of what social justice is to mean. And if we understand Allah's or God's communication and revelation to us accurately, and this is something Imam al-Khomeini could see very well, I think, from what I know, and those who are on his line. Unfortunately, also that expression has withered away. No one ever uses the line of the Imam anymore. So there is some work to be done in this area by those who are there on the front line. May Allah help them, guard them, protect them, guide them. And those who are some steps or some miles behind, but we are all on the same trajectory, from the ignorant, the most ignorant, oppressed person in the most unknown corner of the world to the most heightened in their sacrifices.
Okay, thank you, Mohammad Asi. Just to come back to two more questions, I'm going to ask them together because they're kind of the same thing, and I can pose it to all of our speakers. So we've got two comments here. One saying, thank you to all the speakers. If they focus on solutions as well, that would be helpful. How can we tackle this problem? How can we mobilize Muslims into politics more? Another comment coming in from Kosar on YouTube as well, the same thing. How and what can Muslims do practically to combat some of the Islamophobia in their countries? And I think that's a kind of a good place to end, maybe going to the speakers. You've explained what is happening in European countries, and as many of you said, you don't need to tell European Muslims what Islamophobia is defined as or what the experience is because they're living it. And that key question usually is that. So what do we do now? We have people from across Europe here. Perhaps maybe I'll start with you, Shahar Khan. You are actively involved in the political process there, and you've talked to us about the kind of pushback that you faced. What lessons have you learned, and what advice can you give to these commenters as to how we practically deal with this Islamophobia now? And if I pose that to Shahar Khan, I hope you guys can hear me, because I can hear a lot of crackling in my ear.
Yes, now I hear you. I didn't hear the whole part of the question, but I got a feeling
I apologize for that.
What the question was. Do you hear me? Can you hear me? Anyone?
We can't hear Nargess.
And I think maybe you couldn't hear me. Michelle, the question was from a few viewers: how do you practically deal with this Islamophobia? Going first to Shahar Khan.
Yes, do you hear me?
Yes, I do.
All right. So what I think that racism does, it makes you also feel that you're not part of the country where you live in. If I see what's going on in the Netherlands, we got the elections coming up. We go on the streets and we talk to people and we try to motivate them to vote, for example. And the number one response I get when it comes to rejections is that people say we're not part of this country. And my reaction to that, well, that is what racism does, and that is what racism does want you to feel. Because when you stay in that position, you will not make use of the rights that you have as a citizen in the country where you live. I always give the example of my party, Denk. We saw that in the current parties, we saw that when it comes to racism, when it comes to Islamophobia, when it comes to anti-black racism, the mainstream parties, they were not, how do you call it? They thought it was important by the lips, but not by doing something about it. So what did the people from my party say? Well, if that's the case, if we cannot tackle racism within the current institutions, in current parties, then we will create our own party. So that's what we did. Denk is the first anti-racist party in the Netherlands. Anti-racism is at the core of our party, and we stood up and we won seats in the national election, which I explained earlier. And this is the example I give. Now that we are doing this, we can put issues on an agenda. We can talk about anti-racism. We can pull other parties to our position. We have seen in the last few years that a lot of the mainstream so-called centrist parties, they have taken over proposals that we came up with as in our political program. So we see that the effect of our presence in the national parliament and in the local election, in the local parliaments, is that we see that by getting active into politics, the consequence was that our issues, which is Islamophobia, anti-black racism, is now put up very high on the political agenda, and there are a lot of proposals and measures, government measures, being put into place to combat these forms of racism. And I'm only focusing now on the political part. You got the societal part as well. In Holland, we also have our, let's say, the Dutch version of CCIF, which is called the MELT, the place where you can, I don't know how to translate it perfectly, but the place where you can point and discuss if you see somewhere Islamophobia happening. So just to come to a conclusion, in general, I see that a lot of people are defensive, and they are put in that defensive position because of racism. It makes you think you are less than a citizen. So I'm not gonna make use of the rights I have in this country as a citizen. But I advise to do the opposite thing. Racism makes you feel less than a human, less than a citizen, but make yourself feel as 100% citizen as any other citizens in this country. And if you do that, if you come to that mind state, then you will see, well, there are a lot of options I have in this country to put anti-Islamophobia, anti-racism, put it on the agenda and do something with it, whether it's politics, it's art, it's societal, it's whatever.
A view there from the Netherlands, and I'd like to go to Abed Choudhury just briefly, because I wonder if how you would add or subtract from that from a UK perspective. You were talking about anti-Semitism and definitions, for example. I suppose the UK's had a kind of different trajectory. There, we're kind of talking about, in the Netherlands, a grassroots organisation that's seeing bigger groups take up some of those issues. In the UK, we had, the head of the opposition party right at the top, Jeremy Corbyn. We've seen what has happened there when it came to issues around Islamophobia and anti-Semitism. Don't want to put words in your mouth, but I just wondered, thinking of that, how you would see it adding on to what has been said in the Netherlands there.
Sure, thank you. It's difficult to give anything prescriptive as to do this, do that. IHRC, within IHRC, we have many activities we're doing to combat Islamophobia, but whatever we're doing as an organization, it's a drop in the ocean, and there are other organizations also doing whatever they're doing. So I don't think the important thing here is to say do this or do that. I think it's about understanding mentalities and how we approach this as opposed to the actual action. So I think the first thing I would say is we need to start understanding Islamophobia as a form of racism. This isn't just a hypothetical or anything like that. We need to understand how there's a process of demonizing Muslims, why there's a process of demonizing Muslims. You can read people like Professor Ramon Grossvogel, who's going to be here talking after me, or after this session, or somebody like, let's say, Arzu Merali, one of my colleagues at IHRC. So they've written extensively about this. And I think Muslims need to start getting to grips with this, because unless we can articulate our problem, people aren't necessarily going to be taken as seriously. The second thing is an issue of mentality. It's when it comes to Islamophobia, we need to start pushing back. I think many people are for the softly approach of going to the government cap in hand, trying to sort of get a seat at the table. Let's start talking nicely and let's see if they will listen to us. No, it's not going to work. Islamophobia works to the advantage of those in power, because the Muslim community is an easy scapegoat. We're marginalized, we're poor, we're disempowered. So every single time they need somebody to blame, whether it's COVID, as I mentioned earlier on, or terrorism, or whatever it is, anything to distract from, let's say, going forward, the disaster that is Brexit, let's blame the Muslims. So Islamophobia, they're not just going to give in to our requests. So we need to start shifting our attitude to one of fighting. This is David and Goliath. This is us with a slingshot attacking Goliath. It is not us sitting at a table, having coffee and just getting along. So once we understand that this is a fight, hopefully that should then sort of realign how we approach what it is that we need to do. And the final thing I want to mention is solidarity. Solidarity across racial lines, solidarity across religious lines, and so on. In a previous Islamophobia conference about 3-4 years back, I remember somebody who wasn't Muslim, a black activist, sort of one of the things he said that, in the 60s, 70s, going into the 80s, the Muslim community viewed themselves as part of the black community. And so there was solidarity there. 90s, 2000s onwards, the Muslim community, for whatever reason, has sort of created its own identity outside of a wider black community, and it's just focused in on itself. And there's been that rupture. And that is a theme that has come up a few times when discussing with individuals from communities outside of the Muslim community. That Muslims are very much insular. We're fighting our own fights, and we're not really focusing on anybody else's fights. And I think we need to get out of that mentality. We need to join with those other voices, because A, we will strengthen their voices, and B, we will strengthen our own through that solidarity.
Thank you very much. And thank you to all our speakers on this panel. Abed Choudhury there, Masood Shajara, Huria Batelja, Shahir Khan. Also to Mohammad Aziz, though he did not stay with us. Imam Asi, thank you for popping in again. And earlier in the conference, Hakima Biria. I'm going to hand back to Sanju now. We do have one more question coming in, and I think it might be apt for you and Ramon. A question coming in on YouTube from Faramak Zahari. The question is, can we separate the question of Islamophobia from the anti-colonial, anti-imperialist struggles? I'm sure you'll be discussing that and much more with Ramon. So back to you, Sanju.
Thank you, Nargess. Ramon is apping me all the time that he is getting out of the program off and on. So his connection is apparently with this StreamYard unstable. So I can't get him in. But, oh, Ramon, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here.
Oh, great.
I'm back. I'm back. I don't know for how long, but I've been caught in and out for now 8 times, so let's see.
Okay. So first, Ramon, maybe you can react on the last question of how Islamophobia and the struggle against imperialism and colonialism, how is this connected, but also reflect on the contributions here, and then I'll pick up on that.
Yeah, just to say that in the, Islamophobia is affecting not only people inside what we call the metropolitan centers of the West, but also the countries in the periphery of the West. That is, that they are, Islamophobic projects put in place by the West, Western imperialism in many parts of the world, okay? And especially in the Middle East, the Persian Gulf, all these wars we've seen are Islamophobic wars. So this is linked to colonialism and neocolonialism. There's no way we can delink these two things. And there is, of course, this is done with the complicity of westernized, Muslim elites in third world countries who happen to be the leaders of many of these countries. And they are in complicity with the system of, white supremacy imperialism, with exercising all these Islamophobic racist discourses against their own populations. So this is happening as we talk. So Islamophobia is not just a problem of the West. It's also a problem inside the so-called Muslim world, because the so-called Muslim world is already inside after the destruction of Islamic civilization with the European colonial expansion. The so-called Muslim, world is inside the West too, in a subordinate way, and they've been successful as putting in place westernized Muslim elites that have Muslim identity, but they work for the empires, Western empires, European and USA. And therefore, Islamophobia is a problem across. Now, you don't have to agree with countries attacked by imperialism, with their philosophy or anything. We have to be, if we are anti-imperialists in a coherent way, we have to oppose any intervention in third world countries by Western imperialism of any kind, okay? Even indirectly through neocolonialism, or through aggression, economic blockade, or whatever, what they do in Venezuela, in Cuba, in Iran, etc. We have to be opposed to that, even if we don't necessarily agree with the politics or the policies of these countries, okay? I mean, this is something that is a question of principle. We're not going to you know, uh, condition our support or our struggle against imperialism, you know, to if the government attack, we agree with that government or not. We might disagree 100%, but we're going to oppose the imperialist aggression against any country that is being attacked by imperialism, because that's not going to solve anything. That's just going to complicate things, and that's just going to bring more this, you know, destruction, death, you know, and as we have seen in many countries where with millions of people killed. I mean, this is with, you know, you can name many countries that, as we talk, have been going through this: Iraq, Afghanistan, Syria, Yemen. Right now, as we talk, a lot of people in a humanitarian disaster, you know, with the Saudis in alliance with the Zionists and the American imperialism. So that's my take on this. There's no way we can delink these two things.
Yes, okay, thank you very much, Ramon. Let me weigh in on some of the discussions which was there. I find the experience of Denk in Holland very interesting because it's the first political force in Europe where they have a people of color as a political party identified as a party of people of color, has representation in the national parliament and also in municipalities and provinces and so. And the example that Chair mentioned opens up an interesting thing, and I would like to see Huria's comment and ideas and share comments and ideas on that. Shahar came up with the idea to how to build up solidarity and uses regulation that is in the municipalities of Amsterdam and Rotterdam and other cities in Holland, the shelter program, in which they offer shelter for people who have been oppressed. And by applying it to the oppressed people of France, it shows the hypocrisy of those programs where it is used only in one particular way. And I think we should look into how solidarity between countries could be organized in practical ways like this. And as Abed mentioned, solidarity within a country, but between different social movements, the blacks, the ecological movement. And he mentioned this this idea of and in his analysis of it reminds me of a poem by a German pastor Niemöller, who wrote you know, when first they came for the socialists, I didn't speak out because I wasn't a socialist. Then they came for the trade unionists, I didn't speak out because I was a trade unionist. Then they came for the Jews, I didn't speak out because I wasn't a Jew. And a similar argument could be raised for what Abed said, that if the Muslims are attacked, the whole mechanism is then set in place to attack the ecological movement. And you see it in France, where the movement, the rules and regulations are used to prohibit people to photograph the abuses that French police carries out. It's not only about Muslims or only about blacks. It's also in general the idea that you use the rules and regulation against any social movement that challenges the existing order. and the last comment I want to make is the contribution by Hakime and Mohammad Asi on activism and social justice. And it opens up the discussions which was in Latin America by the liberation theology, where Christianity for a long time was used in a ritualistic way as an opium for the people. And then you get this current within Christianity in Latin America, in the conversation with the Marxism, by the way, where they take up the social justice content of Christ and then put that as a program to have a liberating theology. So these are things which come up when I hear the different analysis there. But I would suggest maybe Ramon, you could shed some light on that.
I'm
before we
sorry,
go
you
to
do, but I just heard half of what you said. So I'm
okay,
going to
all
make
right,
some comments.
yeah,
The sound is
right,
terrible. I haven't been able
right,
to
okay,
listen
all
to
right,
the whole program because there was like half of it you cannot listen. It's just the sound
okay,
is terrible. I don't know why.
uh,
I have a good connection. I have been doing programs, in many places around the world. I never
okay.
have
We have a
this
technical
experience.
problem here.
Yeah, there's
Okay,
some technical problem there. I don't know what it is. Let me just tell you the following now, making some impressionistic uh, speculation of what you said, because I haven't heard you really. Uh, Let me say the following. First of all, we are at a moment of the rise of fascism all over Europe. I think that the financial capitalist elites of Europe have decided at some point they have made a decision to fight extreme right by becoming themselves extreme right. That is what I mean by that. They have decided. This you can see. Macron is a good example, but this is happening also with right-wing politicians that were never, or parties that were never extreme right, that they're now turning extreme right. For example, in Spain, el Partido Popular, the Popular Party, which is a traditional right-wing party, now turning into extreme right, and you could see this all over Europe. There is the conflict is that the extreme right parties are against the European Union. The European Union is an institution organized basically by financial capitalists, okay, to have neoliberal policies all over Europe under the control of the 1%, okay, of, in terms of the resources, economic policies, political policies, everything. Okay, so the European Union is a right-wing neoliberal project that have been quite successful in imposing these policies across Europe. Now they feel threatened because the extreme right parties are hyper nationalists, and many of them are calling to cut off from Europe. And so they feel a threat. There is a contradiction between some kind of nationalist parties who happen to be, uh, or capitalists who happen to be more nationalists, less globalists, and then you have the more globalist financial capitalists. This contradiction is happening in the US, in Europe, right now, inside the Western imperialist countries. And this contradiction now is threatening the existence of the European Union. And so the cadres, politicians of financial capital, are now or have decided at some level, they made a decision that the only way to make this neoliberal Europe survive is by they themselves turning extreme right, so that they can win elections on their extreme right platform, because the rise of the extreme right is now gaining a lot of votes all over Europe. And you have even some governments that are overtly extreme right in Europe, and that are anti-Europe, anti-European Union. And so they are now fighting for trying to. And so Macron is a good example of this, where he turns extreme right to outcompete the extreme right by becoming themselves extreme right, and then keeping the existent present Europe alive. And this is something that, coming back to the early question about Islamophobia and colonialism, the thing is that now a lot of the Muslim population, but not only Muslim, you have Roma people, you have people from African descent, you have people from other, inside Europe today that are living sort of an experience of what settler colonialism is in other parts of the world. That is, you have the white population right in front of you. You are living together with them. You encounter them in the streets constantly, and you are being, in a sense, questioned in your humanity in everyday life, as if you were in a settler colonial context. And so there is a replication, of course, with a lot of nuances because, of course, you don't have so far until now a situation like the genocide in Palestine, right? Or like the genocide of indigenous people in other parts of the world. I'm saying so far because we are coming very close to what happened in the 1930s in Europe, that instead of talking about, Jews, we're talking now about Muslims. And there is an artist, Daniel Ortiz, who is a Peruvian from Peru, who did some kind of artistic work. She was based in Barcelona for many years, where she put a newspaper with the news of the Spanish press, okay? And about Muslims. And what she did was to change where it says synagogue. I mean, where it says mosque, she put synagogue. Where it says Jews, she put Muslims. Where it says Judaism, she put Islam. Wherever you have photos of Muslims praying, then she put there, I'm sorry, of Jewish praying, she put photos of Muslim prayers. When you open that newspaper, I mean, I was shocked when I saw it myself. I was shocked, even though I know the history and all of that. But it was as if you were opening a newspaper in Nazi Germany or in Vichy, France, back in the last century. It was that bad. She tried to do the same project with the French press in France, and she was banned, basically banned from the museum environments and artistic circles. Nobody wanted to fund that. Nobody wanted to support that initiative. And I'm saying that because you do that with the French press. You are in 1930s Nazi Germany. You are in the Vichy, regime, who were the collaborators of the Nazis in France. So anyway, this is a
Right.
comment I want to make, that there is a lot of continuities here from the past.
Thank you, Ramon. It's important. Ramon and I have a weekly conversation, decolonial dialogues. Every Thursday, we try to develop decolonial theory, and we put it on our YouTube channel of the Decolonial International Network. So anyone interested in how we develop decolonial theory, Ramon and I could look into it. We almost are there, finishing at the time. I want to thank all our participants at the panel. I want to thank Sister Nargess and also Shahir Haidari for helping us out with this broadcast. Of course, the organizers, HRC, Decolonial Thought Community, and SACC for the support of this event. There's a lot of things we need to develop and talk about, the solidarity, the way we can move forward. But these are topics maybe for a next conversation. Thank you, everybody, for watching this.